Hey guys, God, it's really crazy to think that it's January. You guys are starting, your spring semester. Some of you, it's your second semester of school. You start to realize how fast time flies. Thanks for sharing, Sydney. That was amazing. And it really fits into what I want to talk about tonight, which is, who are we? Why are we in this room right now? I think we don't ask ourselves that question enough. Why am I here? What's the purpose? What's the point? Because life is short, and why we want to use our time wisely. We want to really do what's most important. And Chi Alpha Duluth is about two things: to discover who God is, and to journey together in knowing and loving Him. And I was thinking back to the fall, how we talked a lot about the character and the nature of God, and how good and kind and beautiful God is, and also how challenging He is, how He wants to change and transform and work in our lives. And if you're still on that journey, we want to invite you to really know this God, the God revealed by Jesus Christ, a God of love, a God who's for us. And then the second part, so we spent a lot of time last semester. The second part is about journeying together. And going on this journey, I think about your story, or so many people's story, about how you're kind of slow to get in. Then there's these moments where everything starts coming together, where in community, you really discover how to love someone and be loved and form friendships and really build your life on God. And that's what we are. The most amazing thing about the Christian faith is that it's not just like some nice ideas that were written down in a book, although there was a book that was written. But at the heart and center of our faith is that God Himself took on the form of a man, came into life to bring us, to show us what life is like and how to live. But we have to ask ourselves the question, what does that mean? And as we launch the spring semester, I want you to ask that question. What does it mean for me to journey together in my faith? How am I going to walk this out? What does that look like? What does it mean for me? And the reality is, let's be honest, let's take a moment to just kind of take stock of things. The journey requires us to navigate quite a bit. You guys are in a very dynamic season in your lives in college, navigating so many things. Endless obstacles and challenges every day. We don't always think about it, but we're making hundreds of decisions every single day and navigating things. Some of them are really simple, something like, what am I going to wear today? What clothes do I put on? Some of them are really more complicated, like solving a differential equation. How many were working through those first semester? Everybody solving some diffie-q? Shout out to my engineering folks. They're really practical if you get into the field. They're really useful. And even navigating really hard things, like how to have that hard conversation with your roommate who just, no matter what, will not do their dishes, Or, so life is full of these challenges. And as we face them, all these things every day, we are so tempted to take shortcuts. When there's a lot of things to do and we don't have a lot of time, shortcuts are always presented to us. For example, instead of hanging your clothes up in the closet, which takes about 10 seconds, we just throw our clothes on the floor. I'm really guilty about that one. It's a simple shortcut. And, these shortcuts, they'll make stuff easy in the beginning, but, it only takes a few days for those clothes to be piling up on the floor and then spilling out the door, and then my wife's yelling at me because my room's a mess. So, how many people have been there?
Tony.
So I want to tell a story about, because the reality is when we take these shortcuts in life, whether they're little things or they're big things, they come back to bite us. And I want to tell a quick story. So we have 4 kids. I've talked a bit about my kids. If you haven't met them, I think many of you have seen them. We have right now 2 8-year-olds, a 7-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So if you want some bustling noise and some fun, come to my house. And my wife and I didn't get the quiet kids. We didn't get the kids who just, kind of shy and they hide behind their mom, and that's not my kids at all. My kids are wild and crazy. In fact, my kids came home today, and I was trying to relax. I was prepping for today. My wife had cleaned their rooms, and she rearranged their rooms for the first time in, I think, like 2 years. And my kids come, my daughter wanders into her room, and all of a sudden she's like, "What? What?" She goes running down the stairs. "You guys, this is crazy. You have to see this." And they're running upstairs just because their rooms got rearranged. And, "Dad, it's the craziest thing ever." I'm like, "Yeah, your bed went from there to there." It's so crazy. So I'm just trying to give you a picture of what my house looks like. And one day, not too long ago, I think it was early in the fall, my wife also works overnights in the hospital, so she's not there all the time. And the most challenging time for me is when it's me and all 4 kids. So I'm cooking dinner one night, and my kids are running around, so I'm navigating a lot of different things, trying to help them with homework, keep them from calm, and then I got food in the oven. So I'm cooking, and all of a sudden, I think I'm off with the kids over here, and all of a sudden the smoke just starts billowing out of the oven. I don't know what, something dripped down there, and it was smoking like crazy. So I run over there to take care of it, and open the oven. It's like this billow of smoke, and then I have a 13-year-old Alaskan Husky. Sorry, I'm thinking what kind of dog I have. I kept trying to call him a lab, but I have a dog, and he's always in the way. He grew up eating raw meat because he was a sled dog, and so as soon as he smells whatever's in the oven, so I go to knock it in, and he knocks me over, and I fall down and almost burn myself like crazy. The smoke comes everywhere, and then all of a sudden the alarm starts just beeping, roaring, and of course my kids think it's like super fun. They're like, "Oh, we're gonna die!" Just running around. And we got our kitchen remodeled, which is amazing. We knocked out a wall in there, but the electrician for code had to put up this brand new smoke alarm, which had never gone off before. And this thing, I don't know what they did with technology now. This thing was like piercing loud, just going through me. And I'm trying to clear the smoke, and the kids are running, and I don't know what to do. And I'm just freaking out. This thing is so loud, it's just piercing through me. And so I tried turning it off, I tried doing everything, and all of a sudden I just ripped the thing right off the wall, opened up the door to my deck, and just threw it outside because I was not doing it. I'm dealing with this later. And the kids are like, "Dad, we almost died." And I'm like, "It's just a smoke alarm, everything's okay." And then I'm like, "Okay, I'll take care of this later." Of course, the night hits me, and by the time I get to the kids' bed, the last thing I remember is that I threw a smoke alarm out the deck. My wife comes home from work that night, and then, so at like 4:30 in the morning, my wife hears this really weird noise. And it's kind of vague because we have a noisemaker that we always keep on because the kids there's always noises in our house. And so she's trying to figure out, it's kind of like vague, like quiet, but she's like, "That's a weird noise." And so she walks downstairs, and at 4:30, she's wandering the kitchen, and then she realizes it's coming from outside on the deck. So she goes out and opens the door, and sure enough, our smoke alarm is going off full bore all through our neighborhood at 4:30 in the morning. And I don't know how they manufacture something. You can't get at the battery unless you break something. And no matter what button she pushes, she can't get it off. Apparently it rained that night, so it set it off. So she doesn't know what to do, and she brings it into the house, but she's scared of waking up the kids, and she had to end up duct taping it like 8 times because she couldn't get the thing to turn on. So the whole story is about shortcuts, right? Shortcuts. Like the price you pay for not doing something. I know it's a simple, goofy story, but I really feel like it's a really poignant story about the reality we're facing today. There's so much going on in our lives. So many things we're navigating for you guys. You're navigating school, which is complicated. You're navigating all these relationships. You got all this pressure to do well. You want to get to know people. You barely have time for anything. I know many of you are working jobs, trying to balance that on top of your homework. And it's pretty easy to procrastinate and have all this stuff build up. And then we got everything external, right? We have COVID-19 that just will not go away. I think we know of like 7 people right now who can't be here tonight because they're coming down with it. We have all the social, political, just arguing, bickering. There's just noise everywhere. And I have a friend who just became a counselor, and the moment he graduated, he had a full load of cases because the toll this is taking on our mental health, it's unprecedented. People, and maybe you face this. I've faced anxiety, depression, panic attacks, just crazy nights where you can't sleep because you're trying to balance so much in life and do the best you can, but it feels like these alarms are always going off and you don't know what to do with them. And sometimes we just want to throw it out. We just want to take the alarm and throw it out the door because we don't know how to handle what's going on. But the reality is that eventually all these things pile up. We can't take shortcuts. We have to face this thing. And what happens over time as enough stuff builds up, as we put a Band-Aid on something, we fail to really, like, for example, relationships, right? You start having conflict with somebody and it builds up and you're not sure how to cross that bridge, and they hurt you and you don't know what to say, and then all of a sudden you find yourself like scared to have that conversation, and it's just drifting away, and then all of a sudden you don't know what to do. And these things just build up in us. You fail a test. All of a sudden, how many of you guys have ever pulled up your phone and all of a sudden your bank account's overdrawn, because you forgot about that check? Got to call mom and dad. Many times in college, I had to call my dad. Say, hey, Dad, how you doing? It's like, good. What do you want? That's always the question. And how do we cope with these things? As stuff builds up in our lives, there's just so many different ways. I don't know how many times I've been, streaming something, watching something, and I'm like, I'm not even enjoying this right now. I'm just escaping. I'm just trying to get away from the stress. And then I find, of course, when I'm watching Netflix or whatever, there's always something to eat, and you're not paying attention. So we're coping things with what we eat, with how, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's eating too much. Maybe it's not eating enough, trying to control that. Maybe it's looking at porn. Maybe it's, there's something. There's just ways when we don't cope with what's going on, that we find ourselves sort of spiraling down out of control. And what do? We get to that place. And I just feel like, it's a new semester. There's a lot of excitement. I'm sure you're all hyped up for what's going to happen. It's really true. But what about all that stuff underneath? And what do? What's the answer here? And that's who we want to be here in this community, is to not just let that stuff sit. We want to get into it. What do? And here's the good news, is that we can turn to Jesus, who, I don't know what your experience is like with him, but Jesus isn't just some sort of out there being who has a few ideas, and maybe if you're good enough, one day you'll go to heaven and you'll meet him. Jesus came to our world as a man, and he lived a life. For 30 years, we don't know a lot about the life of Jesus. We know he was a carpenter. We know he probably lost his dad along the way, but he lived a pretty simple life. But what I believe is, and what's evident, is that throughout that time, he was learning what it's like to be one of us, to really know the pain, to know the heartache. God came right to our situation. He cares about us in our everyday. And there's such an invitation for us to know him, to be with him. And here's the amazing thing. We don't think about this a lot with Jesus, but he was a genius. No one's teaching has ever had even close to the impact that the teaching of Jesus has had. Almost everything that we take for granted now in terms of what we value in society came from him. Before Jesus, and to be fair, the revealing of God to the people of Israel, we didn't value him in life the same way. We didn't care about loving neighbors, loving our enemies. These are all radical things that we take for granted that came from Jesus. He's brilliant. And his Sermon on the Mount is one of the most beautiful and powerful things you could ever read. I encourage you to read that in Matthew 5-7. And he speaks to this very issue I'm trying to raise today. This issue about the very life we face and how challenging it can be. So I want to read this passage from Matthew chapter 7, if you have a Bible, otherwise it'll be on the screen. Jesus speaks to so much of the reality of what life is like. Matthew 7, 13 through 14 says this, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Now, you might read this, as I remember reading this the first time, and some people have this criticism of Jesus or of Christianity that it's kind of exclusive. It makes this bold claim that there's really only one way to go, and anyone who doesn't go that way, they're wrong, and they got to fix themselves or figure this out. That there's this one little narrow path that people have to walk. And when you read this, Scripture kind of feels like that. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate that leads to destruction, but small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life. But as I thought about this and I read through and actually looked at the underlying Greek behind the text, what Jesus is talking about here is not exclusion. He's not saying that this road, that God is making this road narrow to exclude a bunch of people. He's speaking to the reality of life that we all know, that life isn't easy, that this broad road he's talking about is just taking shortcuts, taking the easy way. The narrow road is not a road that's hard to find. It's a road that's hard to walk. In Jesus' time, they had all these. They lived in the hills, somewhat in the desert. And the narrow roads were these winding roads through these steep cliffs that would go up to the cities. And these were dangerous places, for one, because they were through the wilderness. There was animals. They didn't have good footing. You're in the desert, and there's not a lot to drink. It's hot, and also it was a hotbed for people to ambush others on the road in these narrow places. So what Jesus is speaking about is there's so many different ways we can go in our lives. So many things so many choices we make every day. But to really find the road to life is a narrow road, one that Jesus wants to help guide us on. And so, and it's a point we need to take home. And there's a guy who did his own translation of the Bible. It's called The Message. This guy's name was Eugene Peterson. And he really helped me understand this verse on a different level. His translation of it says this: "Don't look for shortcuts to God. The market is flooded with surefire, easygoing formulas for a successful life that can be practiced in your spare time. Don't fall for that, even though crowds of people do. The way to life, to God, is vigorous and requires total attention." Vigorous and requires total attention. Sometimes we think of Christianity, and one of the big concepts in our faith is grace and faith. And we have a conception sometimes that means grace is just something we get without having to do anything for that, which there's a lot of truth to what, the truth is that we don't earn it. But God isn't a genie. We just rub the magic lamp and everything magically appears. And everything gets fixed. We're invited to go on a journey, to build our lives in a way that Jesus wants to show us. Now, I'm sure that's really encouraging you right now. Basically telling you, hey, this path to Jesus isn't easy. But what in life isn't easy? Or what the best things in life are never easy, right? Think about college. Why are we all here? Why are you guys going to spend how many hours and how many classes? It's not easy, but it's worth it because of where it's leading you to. Because you know that pressing into that math assignment you don't want to do, or sitting through that long lecture, or memorizing, economic terms or something. They're all they're building towards something. And any athlete knows that. You have to practice to get where you want to go. And so I want to talk today really practically invite us on this journey toward Jesus. And there's three ways. So the summary of my sermon is this. We find life when we walk the narrow road with Jesus. I think the older you get, the more you realize that there's so many different choices you can make, and few of them lead to exactly where you want them to go. But Jesus invites us down this path when we trust him and follow his ways that will lead us to the life that he came to bring. So let's talk about how we do that. Step one is we need to surrender to Jesus what we think we know. We're going to read one of my favorite stories from Scripture because it's we see Jesus kind of in a rare form here, which is really entertaining and really eye-opening. Matthew 16, it says this, from 21 through 24. From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the religious law. He would be killed, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead. But Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for such sayings. Heaven forbid, Lord, he said, this will never happen to you. Jesus turned to Peter and said, get away from me, Satan. This is wow. Jesus is messing around here. Small group leaders, could you imagine the next time someone in your small group says something that's a little bit out there, someone's like, yeah, I feel like the Holy Spirit is like the Force in Star Wars. And you're like, I don't think so. But imagine if someone says something like, get behind me, Satan. You know not what you speak. I mean, it's a serious thing for Jesus to turn to Peter and say this. Get away from me, Satan. Why? Why is Jesus being so strong in this passage? And then he says this right after he says this. He says, you are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. I think it's really, really important. Peter, to understand what Peter's saying here, he's basically telling Jesus, you can't go die on the cross. You're supposed to save the world. You're supposed to free us from these horrible Romans who have been oppressing and killing and dominating our people. You can't go give up your life. Because he didn't understand. He was thinking it from a human perspective. Of course, it doesn't make sense. But God has a totally different perspective than what we have. We have to let him show us that. It says, then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must go give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will find it. You will save it. So we have to surrender to Jesus what we think we know. That's not an easy thing to do. It took Peter went on quite the journey. I love watching his story throughout the Scriptures. But he came to this moment when it all came down to it, he denies Jesus in the face of suffering for him. So we all have these moments where we realize our own ideas, our own thoughts aren't going to lead us to the place that we want to be. And so the first step in walking this narrow road with Jesus is letting his perspective come. Letting him show us his reality when we can't see it. The second thing is we need to put his word into practice in our lives. It's from Matthew 7:24. It says this, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. And it fell with a great crash. Again, so often we bring God with this perspective. God, what are you doing in my life? God, what's happening? I don't see it. We go to God, we're kind of like crisis managers with God. Whenever our prayer life goes up significantly when something's going wrong, right? And we're like, what are you doing? How come nothing's happening? And Jesus tells a story about how can our lives go the way we want them to do. And even sometimes we love to hear good ideas about God. We love to have these thoughts. But Jesus says those who hear these words of mine and put them into practice are the ones whose house is built on a rock. So that's the second step to walking this narrow road, is to really understand what God is saying for our lives right now. And that's why we do this together in community. That's what our small groups are all about. If you're not fully committed to a small group, going on a weekly basis, reading the scriptures together, talking about what could this mean for me, you're missing something. Which leads me to my final point. And this is the heart of it. If you hear nothing else I say, this is the part that matters. When we walk the narrow road with Jesus, we receive his life. Okay? I'm going to read this from John chapter 1. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing that was made that has been made. And it says this in verse 4. It's one of my favorite verses in the scriptures. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. When we think about life, when we think about our faith, when we think about where we're going, when we're really honest, no matter how good or bad things are going, it's really about what's going on inside of us. I can think of some of the times when I thought life was going good or times when it was going bad, and that didn't seem to matter. There's always been this something in me, longing to know something more than what I'm experiencing. And Jesus came to bring that to us, to each one of us in a unique and beautiful way. And I think the best way for me to share that is to share a story, again, about my son. So I have two sons, and many of you know that Sarah and I adopted two boys. They were 4 and 3 when we adopted them. Now, Isaac is 8 and Jack is 7. And they had been abandoned. They had been abused. They were found in an apartment by the police shortly before they were removed from their home. There was not a scrap of food in the house. They both were wearing diapers at that age, and neither of them were changed. There was bullet casings and drug paraphernalia all over the floor, and this is the experience they had. They were removed from there. And then they were brought into another foster home where there's a boyfriend of a gal was taking care of them. They call this guy the Boom Man because he was so scary to them. So they came into our house, and they had a lot of challenges, a lot of emotional challenges. Sarah and I, for the last 3.5 years, have tried with all our hearts just to give them a normal life, just to show them what it's like to have everything that most of us in this room just take for granted, just stability, just food every day, and a chance to really thrive in life. So very early on in Isaac's life, I wanted to get him into sports. It's something I grew up doing. My dad and I bonded like crazy. So the first summer he was there when he was 5 at the time. We played soccer. And I'll never forget, the first day of soccer, it was like he ran for like 5 minutes, and as soon as a kid kicked the ball away from him, he just ran off the field, kicking and screaming, telling me how much he hated it. And it was just horrible, and I just thought, man, what are we going to do? Just want him to know that when you work at something, it will work. And there's been moments of so much despair, as Sarah and I have seen them just give up so quickly. They just don't. Kids develop like these natural ways to comfort themselves that they learn very early on. And my boys didn't have that. So as soon as they were frustrated, as soon as they made a mistake, as soon as their anger came, they don't know how to control it. It's been really scary for Sarah and I at times. But we've tried, just giving them that consistency they need. Just tell them, hey, buddy, you're doing great. We love you. Keep going. Learn how this is. And, many of our staff have heard me complain many times. Why? Because it's just overwhelming. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to love them. But and we don't see the progress. When you're with something every day, you don't see how things change. You know how like you go home and your I don't know, your aunt, your grandma's like, "Wow, you've grown up so much. Look at the beard you grew." You know, like whatever, like because you don't see yourself change, but they do. And so Sarah and I never realized what's actually happening. And I had a window into that just last weekend. My son Isaac, after refusing to do any sports for a long time, we went skating with his cousins over Thanksgiving, and he came home and he said, "Dad, I want to play hockey." And I was like, "Yeah, buddy, let's do it." So we got into hockey, and he's 8 years old, and Duluth is like the biggest hockey city in the entire country. So all the other kids that he plays with, they've been skating since they were 4. And I go to the first practice, and the first thing I hear from the dad is like, "So how's your backyard rink doing?" It's like, "Oh, mine's great. How's yours?" You know, like they all have backyard rinks. They've all been skating every day of their life since they were 4. So my son comes in, and we've gone skating a bunch, but he's just starting out. He barely can do it, and it was really hard for him. He fell so many times. He didn't know how to skate backwards. And he came to me and said, "Dad, I don't know if I can do this." And I'm like, "Buddy, let's stick with this. Let's see what happens." And he skated for over a month, and he's like, "I'm getting bored because we're just doing practices." Well, last weekend they had their first tournament finally. I was like, "All right, this could be great." So Isaac had 3 games, and the first game he was really tentative. You know, like he's learned how to skate really well, which I'm really proud of him. But as soon as he touched the puck, he'd either just kind of slap it away or he'd skate up with it really careful because he didn't want to lose it. You know, he's feeling nervous. So he didn't have a great game, and he didn't have a lot of fun. And we had a game later that afternoon, and we drove back, and I was talking to him about it. I gave him some pointers. I grew up playing hockey, so I was helping him, and he's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll try that. I'll do that." And I was really excited. And so the second game was completely different. And about 5 minutes into the game, he just skated. This kid was skating down. They didn't have goalies, but this kid was skating down, and he's about to score on Isaac's net. And Isaac saw it, and he skated as fast as he could and cut him off, knocked the puck away. And then he picked up the puck, and instead of going really slow, he skated as hard as he could, went right around this guy, and came in and scored. And I saw him turn around, and his face lit up, and he raised his hand in like this hockey pose. And what was awesome was his coaches had been for him the whole time. And his coach jumped up and goes, "That's how we play hockey." He said, "You play defense, and then you score." And Isaac came off the ice, and the coach ran over to him and gave him a high five, and Isaac jumped, and he was beaming. And he had all this confidence. He goes back out on the ice, and he scored 6 more goals. 6 more goals. My son, come on. And as that play happened and as the coach happened, tears were welling up in my eyes because it's all he's been through, you know, and all that he needs. And he came off, and the coach said, "Isaac, you were the MVP." And Isaac got a trophy. They all got trophies. You know, it's a participation trophy. But he thought it was all because he was so great, you know. And he's like, "Dad, I want to put this trophy up in my room." And we put it up in his room. And I was praying at the end of all this, and I said, "Lord, thank you so much that he got to feel normal, he got to feel special." And I'm like, I love him so much, I'm so proud of him. And you know what the Lord said to me? He said, "Dan, that's exactly how I feel about you." You know, it's hard for me to explain what my wife and I have gone through over the last 3 years. All this hardship. Sometimes I'm saying, "I hate you, Dad. I wish I would have never came here. I'd be better off with my own parents who abandoned them," you know. The Lord said to me, "Dan, that's how I feel about you. I'm so proud of you. I love you." And not only did God say that to me, he filled me with that peace and that joy and that sense that I was doing something that mattered and that I'm loved and that I'm a part of something great. That's the life of Jesus Christ. Not just that we succeed, that we get, you know, you get a good job and you make money. There's a million people in our world who have all the money and there's no happiness, no joy. But it says in the scriptures, in Jesus was life, and it was the light of human beings.